The Sea Captain General, Episode 4. Final Square. Judge Heart's End and the Steady Legacy. What's up, you magnificent bastards? Welcome back to the Masonic Files, where we cut the powdered wig fluff, skip the marble statues, and talk straight about brothers who actually lived brotherly love, relief, and truth, while sailing the high seas, signing big papers, dodging cannon fire, and then grinding through the unglamorous work of building a nation when the glory faded and the real bills came due. No incense, no robes, just salt spray, tar, blood, cannon smoke, courtroom dust, aching joints, and the quiet, savage choices a man makes when the body starts failing, but the obligation doesn't. This is the final episode of our 4-part deep dive into Brother William Whipple, the sailor turned brigadier general who helped smash the British at Saratoga. In Episode 1, we followed the Kittery boy from a seafaring family who went to sea young, rose to ship's master by 21, and joined St. John's Lodge No. 1. Episode 2 rode the flip, his patriot organizing in the Provincial Congress, election to the Continental Congress, signing the Declaration, and how that quarterdeck discipline, reinforced by the steady brotherhood of St. John's Lodge, carried him through the shift. Episode 3 sat in the smoke and mud at Saratoga, where Brigadier Whipple commanded New Hampshire troops at Freeman's Farm and Bemis Heights, helped turn the tide, and was chosen to help negotiate Burgoyne's surrender, one of the war's decisive moments. Now the fighting fades and the long, often thankless work of building begins. Whipple returns to Congress until 1779, then serves in the New Hampshire State Assembly, becomes judge of the Superior Court, and acts as financial receiver for the state. He lives out his days in Portsmouth as a respected judge and community leader. In his later years, heart issues, the accumulated wear of decades at sea under brutal stress, wartime command, and post-war grind, finally catch up. While traveling his court circuit in the fall of 1785, he suffers a serious episode, faints, and falls from his horse. The victory at Saratoga in October 1777 changed everything, but it didn't end the war for William Whipple or the young nation. He returned north with a hard-won reputation as a man who delivered under fire, yet the sense of duty that had pulled him from the quarterdeck kept him in the fight. He went back to Congress for a time, continuing the grinding legislative work of sustaining the army, securing alliances, and holding the fragile coalition of states together. Philadelphia in those years smelled of wood smoke from endless fires, horse manure in the streets, unwashed delegates who had been on the road for weeks, and the quiet desperation of a revolution that was still one bad winter away from collapse. It smells pretty much the same today. Whipple brought the same steady command he had used on heaving decks and muddy battlefields. He measured every decision against the larger goal of independence. He kept ambitions bounded so personal glory didn't fracture the effort. He lived the obligation in the smoke-filled meeting rooms of Philadelphia just as he had on the quarterdeck. Clear orders, fair dealing, and the calm authority of a man who had stared down worse storms. The same square he carried from St. John's Lodge guided his measurements of policy and alliance. The level reminded him that delegates from small colonies like New Hampshire stood equal with those from Virginia or Massachusetts. By 1779, Whipple had shifted his focus back to New Hampshire. The state was battered. Years of war, coastal raids, economic wreckage, and the constant drain of supplying the Continental Army had left it exhausted and broke. Experienced hands were desperately needed to rebuild a government stripped of royal authority and turn revolutionary chaos into something that could actually function. Whipple served in the state assembly, helping shape laws for a new order. He was appointed judge of the Superior Court, riding circuit across the state to hear cases in towns still raw from British and Loyalist raids. He also acted as financial receiver, managing the young state's strained finances, collecting taxes, settling debts, and trying to keep the books from bleeding red when paper money was nearly worthless and hard currency was as rare as a calm sea in winter. The work was unglamorous but essential. Courts had to function so land titles could be settled, contracts enforced, and civil order restored in communities still healing from invasion and suspicion. Whipple rode circuit on rough, rutted roads that turned to sucking mud in the rain and froze into bone-jarring ruts in winter. Courtrooms were makeshift, sometimes a tavern back room that still smelled of last night's rum, pipe smoke, and wet wool. Sometimes a barn with hay underfoot and the lowing of cattle outside the walls. He brought the same practical discipline he once used commanding ships through howling gales. Fair measurement of evidence, steady nerves when passions ran high in the courtroom, and the ability to deliver justice without theatrics or favoritism. Men who had once sailed under him or fought beside him at Saratoga now stood before his bench, trusting that the former sea captain would measure honestly. The square from St. John's Lodge guided every ruling. The level reminded him that every farmer, fisherman, merchant, or former soldier standing before him was equal under the law. The trowel helped him spread practical relief through fair decisions that helped stabilize communities still licking their wounds. He kept ambitions bounded, refusing to let old grudges or political pressure warp justice. Even as hard issues from decades at sea began to whisper warnings, Whipple kept showing up, riding circuit, hearing cases, balancing the books, and quietly living the obligation long after the cheering had stopped, and the real, grinding work of building a state began. His household in Portsmouth continued under the steady hand of Catherine Moffat Whipple, while her husband rode circuit on muddy roads or sat in the state assembly. Catherine managed the home, the accounts, the extended family, and the constant flow of visitors that came with public life. The couple had no children of their own, but the house on the waterfront was rarely quiet. Prince Whipple remained a central figure in the household for the rest of his life. Whipple had granted him the rights of a freeman around 1781, on the day Prince married Dinah Chase. Formal manumission papers followed in 1784. Prince continued working for the family as a free man, trusted aide, coachman, and friend, until his own death in 1796. He was no longer property, but he stayed part of the Whipple world by choice. The path had not been clean or fast. In 1779, Prince and 18 other enslaved men in New Hampshire had petitioned the legislature for broader abolition, arguing they had fought for liberty yet remained in chains, which is a fair enough argument. The petition was tabled as ill-timed during the heat of war. Even in patriot New Hampshire, freedom came slowly and unevenly. Whipple's actions toward Prince were sincere but late, a human reflection of the imperfect journey many signers walked. The contradiction of his earlier involvement in the triangular trade and slave ownership lingered in the background. Yet his gradual steps toward manumission showed the principles he had signed for in 1776 were still quietly working on him. The square reminded him to measure his conduct honestly, even when it was uncomfortable. The chisel kept refining the rough edges long after the cheers of Saratoga had faded. The level told him that in the eyes of the craft every man stood equal under obligation, a truth easier to declare on parchment than to live fully in the daily life of a Portsmouth merchant's household. In the broader post-war effort, brothers like Joseph Hughes continued quietly supplying the Navy from Edenton, using his merchant networks to keep ships afloat and stabilize North Carolina's shattered economy. Elbridge Gerry pushed relentlessly for resources in Congress and later stood stubborn at the Constitutional Convention, refusing to sign until a Bill of Rights was guaranteed. Robert Treat Paine applied his sharp legal mind and legendary objection-maker precision to Massachusetts courts and governance, arguing cases and helping shape the new state's legal framework. Whipple's path fit naturally among them, practical men using the tools they had been given, turning wartime service into the unglamorous work of nation-building. St. John's Lodge in Portsmouth remained a quiet anchor through it all. The lodge brought together sea captains, merchants, artisans, and former soldiers who valued mutual support in a port town still healing from raids, blockades, and economic ruin. Whipple's active membership reinforced the same discipline he had learned on the quarterdeck: honest dealing under pressure, steady command when tempers flared, and a brotherhood that crossed the usual divides of class and politics. He lived those principles in the daily grind. The level reminded him that every farmer, fisherman, widow, or merchant standing before his bench was equal under the law, no matter how rough their hands or fine their coat. The trowel helped him spread practical relief through fair rulings that stabilized communities still raw from war. The square measured every decision against truth, even when it meant disappointing powerful men or enforcing unpopular judgments. The plum kept him upright on those long circuit rides when his heart began to falter and the roads turned to mud or ice. This was the long game after the glory. The same hands that had once held a ship's wheel now held the gavel in smoky taverns and drafty barns, helping turn the raw victory of revolution into something that could actually endure. Whipple kept showing up, riding circuit, hearing cases, balancing the books, and quietly living the obligation long after the parades had ended and the real grinding work of building a state began. As the years passed, the wear of decades at sea, wartime command, and post-war responsibilities began to show. Whipple's heart issues worsened. The accumulated strain of long voyages and freezing winds, battlefield stress at Saratoga, endless circuit rides on bad roads, and the constant pressure of public service took its toll. In the fall of 1785, while traveling his court circuit, he suffered a serious episode. He fainted and fell from his horse. Carried home to Portsmouth, he was confined to his room. Friends and family gathered. He now faced an enemy from within, his own body betraying him after years of relentless service. Confined to his room, he dies on November 28th, 1785, at age 55. Catherine Moffat Whipple had stood beside him through the final years, sharing the merchant life, the revolutionary pressures, and the quiet judicial days. She managed the bustling household on the Portsmouth waterfront while her husband rode circuit or sat in the assembly, keeping the home fires burning and the accounts in order during the long absences that came with public service. Their marriage, forged in the years before the storm, proved steady through war, financial strain, and the slow decline of Whipple's health. The couple had no children of their own, but the house was rarely empty. Nieces and nephews, former crew members, lodge brothers, and neighbors filled the rooms with stories, laughter, and the constant smell of salt air drifting in from the harbor. Fellow judges, assembly members, and old shipmates worked alongside William Whipple in the post-war reconstruction. The people of Portsmouth, the port community that had known him first as a hard-driving sea captain and later as a respected judge, remembered a man who had delivered when it mattered most. The waterfront, the lodge room, and the courthouse all felt the loss of a steady hand that had guided them through gales both literal and political. A post-mortem shows part of his heart had become ossified. The New Hampshire Gazette praises him. In him concentrated every principle that exalts the dignity of man. His disinterested patriotism and public services are now known to all. He was buried in Portsmouth's Old North Burying Ground, St. John's Lodge No. 1 remembered him as an active and faithful brother. Later, a military lodge was named in his honor, the William Whipple Military Lodge, a fitting tribute to the sea captain who brought quarterdeck discipline to both battlefield and bench. His legacy is not the flash of a single bold act, but the steady accumulation of practical service, courts that functioned, finances that stabilized, and a state that moved from contested frontier to functioning member of the Union. This was the quiet close of a life lived with salt in the veins and obligation in the bones. A sea captain who had helped win a decisive victory at Saratoga, signed for independence, and then spent his remaining years measuring justice honestly in smoky courtrooms and muddy towns. The working tools never left him. Even at the end, they helped him square his final accounts. The sea captain who once commanded vessels through the raging Atlantic and helped deliver victory at Saratoga spends his final years riding circuit as a judge, managing state finances, and serving his community until a failing heart claims him at 55. The man who signed the Declaration and led troops at Bemis Heights keeps grinding in the unglamorous work of building a functioning state. The contradiction of his earlier slave trading and ownership lingers, yet his gradual manumission of print shows the principles he signed for continuing to shape him. This isn't a flawless hero riding off into legend. It's a brother with rough edges, salt, command, political realities, moral contradictions, who kept measuring honestly and delivering steady service until the end. We've walked the full arc with him, from Kittery sailor and triangular trade captain to Portsmouth merchant, declaration signer, brigadier at Saratoga, judge and community leader who served until his heart gave out. Next time you're in Portsmouth walking the old waterfront or Old North Burying Ground, or you hear about New Hampshire's role in the Revolution or Saratoga, remember Brother William Whipple of St. John's Lodge No. 1, the sea captain who squared his life with the working tools, signed for independence, helped deliver a decisive victory, and kept serving his state with steady command until the end. If you're out there grinding, on a ship, in a courtroom, leading your own crew, or just trying to live up to principles while carrying past contradictions, remember Whipple. Keep discipline when the storm hits, support your brothers, deliver when the call comes, and square your actions even when the contradictions are real. This has been episode 4 of the Masonic Files on Brother William Whipple, the Sea Captain General series. Final square, Judge Heart's End and the Steady Legacy. Thank you for riding along through the Sea Captain General. Hit subscribe. Share this 4-episode series with your lodge brothers, your history buffs, or anyone who has sailed through storms and still kept command. I'll catch you in the next Masonic Files deep dive. Stay square, stay savage, stay Masonic.